People will talk about yard work like it's boring, but every neighborhood has at least one story about someone digging around and pulling up something they didn't expect. Something strange enough that everyone starts talking about it. A small object in the dirt. Something weirder and sometimes scarier than old bottle caps or a broken garden spade. Finding these things can go in any direction. Some of these discoveries can impact the rest of your life, maybe bringing in money that no one saw coming, making you rich beyond your wildest dreams. And sometimes they can haunt you at night, turning up in your nightmares and filling your day with dread. So what happens when a regular backyard chore crosses path with folklore? Welcome to Down the Crooked Path. I'm your host, Amanda Joy. Join me as we dive into eerie and spine-chilling stories that blur the lines between reality and the unknown. From cryptids and mysterious disappearances to true crime, UFO sightings, and paranormal activity. Venture into the unknown and uncover the secrets that lie down the crooked path. Across human history, people have carved faces into stone. From Easter Island's Maui to Celtic stone heads, to Roman busts to half-eroded figures built into church walls. Again and again, different cultures separated by oceans and centuries have all reached the same idea: to give stone a face. And to this day, archaeologists still argue about why. Were some gods? Maybe some were ancestors, others a warning, and some perhaps were meant to watch. Are they cursed? Are they evil? Or are they just art? Well, that depends on who you ask. One of the most famous examples are on Easter Island, which are mostly believed to be representations of deceased chiefs and important ancestors, or even the supposedly cursed crystal skulls. While these are probably the most famous stone heads, writers such as Livy or Diodorus Siculus have described a variety of head-like traditions, from Celtic warriors removing heads in battle to carved stone heads uncovered across Celtic regions. There is historically and archaeological material that points towards what scholars refer to as a Celtic cult of the head. Irish and Welsh mythology adds even more detail to this theory. The stories include severed heads kept as trophies, heads being used as projectiles, and heads that continue to speak after being separated from the bodies that they belong to. There's also a theory that carving faces into turnips for Samhain, which was later developed into Halloween's jack-o'-lantern traditions, may have been influenced by the same focus of heads. Archaeologist Anne Ross describes the Celtic view in her book Pagan Celtic Britain. She said, quote, "The Celts venerated the head as the symbol of divinity and the powers of the other world, and regarded it as the most important bodily member, the very seat of the soul." So while most Greeks, Egyptians, and followers of the Abrahamic religions at the time subscribed to cardiocentric hypotheses, which placed the person's wisdom and, in some cases, their soul in the heart, the Celts took the opposite view. They placed that importance in the head and believed that the person's wisdom and immortal soul were centered in the brain. The Greek philosopher Pythagoras also supported the heliocentric view. Many of his ideas about the body and the soul line up with those Celtic beliefs, and some scholars suggested that he may have drawn this from Celtic thought. Diodorus Siculus, writing in the 1st century BCE, gave detailed accounts of goulash Celts removing the head from fallen enemies and fastening them to the necks of their horses. He described warriors handing the blood-covered weapons of their opponents to attendants and carrying the heads home as part of their victory display. According to his account, the heads were then nailed to the houses in the same way hunters would mount the heads of animals that they had taken. He also wrote that the heads of important enemies were embalmed in cedar oil and kept in chests. They were then shown to visitors, and some warriors even claimed that their fathers or ancestors had refused large sums of money for them. The author described men who boasted about turning down an equal weight of gold for the head that they kept, presenting it as proof of their bravery. Researchers have found traces of coniferous resin on Iron Age skulls through chemical analysis at former goulash settlements in the south of France. Other goulash sites have produced a sculpture of a mounted warrior carrying a severed head around a horse's neck, along with stone pillars built with cavities designed to display human skulls. Celtic stone-carved heads give us even more insight into this idea. One example is the three-faced head from Corlac Hill in County Cavan, dated to the 1st or 2nd century CE. Another is a three-headed figure from the Acropolis of Rocapurtus near Marseille, dating to the 3rd century BCE. In Welsh mythology, specifically the Mabinogion, Bran the Blessed appears as the High King of Britain, and he's a giant. After crossing the Irish Sea on foot to retrieve his sister from her abusive husband, an Irish king, Bran ends up ambushed in a hostel. He destroys a magical cauldron that the Irish king had been using to revive his soldiers, a cauldron Bran had originally given him after Bran's half-brother mutilated several of the king's horses during the marriage negotiations. Bran dies from his wound, and he tells his companion to remove his head and bring it back to Britain. His severed head continues to speak and entertain them for 7 years. A similar setup appears in the Irish tale The Destruction of de Daguerre's Hostel. The High King of Ireland, Conaire Mór, is trapped inside a burning hostel. His companions keep putting out the fire, and Conaire kills around 1,200 attackers. He's been cursed with a supernatural thirst, and the water supply has been already used to extinguish all of the flames. His champion, Mac Shet, travels across Ireland to find water after nearby rivers have failed him. He returns just in time to see Conaire beheaded. Conaire's several head remains thirsty and drinks the water that Mac has brought him and recites a poem praising him. Even with all of this history, nothing compares to the 2 heads that 2 young boys in Hexham would pull out of the ground. In May of 1971, brothers Colin and Leslie Robson were in their backyard garden of their home, 3 Reed Avenue in Hexham. 11-year-old Colin was clearing weeds and digging in the garden when he came across a strange-looking stone head. His brother, 8-year-old Leslie, was watching from inside and saw the discovery. Excited, he ran out and helped his brother dig some more. They found a second carved stone head. They ran inside and placed them in their mother's hands, excited by the idea that they had found something unusual. She wasn't exactly excited about the discovery, as the boys were. She thought they were ugly, and she's not exactly wrong. She also got this weird feeling from them, but she could tell her boys were excited by their find, so she cleaned them off and placed them on a shelf. Once the dirt was brushed off, the heads looked even stranger. Each one was roughly spherical and small enough to sit in a hand, slightly smaller than, say, a tennis ball, and they were heavy. Both had a short neck-like stump, as if they had once been attached to something larger. Their faces were simple, pointy noses, shallow features, and these expressions that really didn't offer much. People who handled them couldn't agree on their size either. Some said tennis ball, others said tangerine. Their color was a greenish gray, and the way that they glistened was almost like quartz. Descriptions from those who held them varied, but most agreed that they were palm-size, roughly round, and carved just enough to suggest a face. The simplicity didn't stop people from projecting identities onto them, though. One head was nicknamed the Boy, with narrow carved stripes running from the forehead to the back that some interpreted as hair. And it had a pronounced jaw. Its expression was one that people assumed as calm. The other head collected a rotating set of labels: the Girl, the Old Woman, and my personal favorite, the Hag. Writers described bulging eyes and a beaked nose and a jutted jaw. This head had a grimace and what seemed like a hair covering. None of these descriptions explained how anyone thought that they could assign gender to 2 carved stones, but the labels stuck and kept circulating. Paul Screeton's book, The Quest for the Hexham Heads, gathered many of these descriptions. The urban prehistorian writing about the book summed up the contrast very clearly. Quote, "One was known as the Boy, with hair mottled in stripes running from front to back. The other was treated less favorably in Hexham Heads literature, dubbed, depending on the source, as the Girl, and according to Don Robbins, had a strong beaked nose." Whether these interpretations came before or after the disturbances that followed is unclear. What is clear is that the Robsons had no idea what they had brought into their house when their sons walked in holding 2 small greenish-gray carved heads that glistened under the kitchen light. To date, the Heads also produced varied results. Some tests and stylistic comparisons suggested that they might be relatively recent, possibly made in the 20th century. Other opinions lean towards an older origin, pointing to wear, patina, or supposed links to the Iron Age or early practices. No single conclusion held for long, and every new claim seemed to undermine the last one. Once the Heads were inside the Robson home, weird events started happening. The family found the Heads in new positions after leaving the room, despite nobody supposedly touching them. At first, they noticed that the Heads would be turned on the shelf. Somehow, suddenly, they would be facing the garden outside. Every single day, the family would move them back so that they faced the room, but somehow in the morning, they would come downstairs and find the Heads facing the garden again. No one in the house would admit to moving them. The brothers also had a sister named Wendy, and she took the Heads and placed them in a box under her bed. At night, though, the box would move from one corner of the bed to a different corner, and the corner of the bed that they happened to move to was the one closest to the garden. Now, Wendy is an adult, and she was on her honeymoon when the Heads were discovered, so she isn't some older teenage sibling that's just playing a prank trying to freak her brothers out. She talked about her experience with the Heads on an online forum. Even more things started to happen, similar to poltergeist activity, which refers to unexplained physical movement like objects sliding, falling, or being hurled, doors opening on their own, or loud impacts that seem to come from inside the house rather than outside forces. Usually, these are violent as well. These events usually happen in the middle of the night around 2 a.m. Loud crashes would wake the family, as if someone downstairs was throwing things. Items like bottles would have been thrown across the home without anybody being in the room. During one event, a mirror was found smashed in a frying pan. Crashes weren't the only sounds that were reported either. Something that would sound like a whip being cracked was heard through the house as well. At one point, Mrs. Robinson eventually carries the Heads next door to show the neighbors, the Dodd family, hoping that someone else might recognize them or at the very least have an opinion about what they are. The Robsons' home is attached to the Dodds, and after that visit, the disturbances were no longer limited to one side of the semi-detached house. The Dodds began reporting their own problems. At first, Nellie Dodd, the mother, would report a horrible smell, almost like wet dog, and their son would have marks on his body that looked like dog bites. One night, Nellie Dodd is sleeping in her kids' room because her daughter is sick. At some point in the night, their son Brian wakes up because he can hear the dog howling downstairs, so he heads downstairs to see what's going on with his dog. He sees that the front door is wide open, and it's the middle of the night, so he's terrified, and he runs back upstairs and jumps into bed. As he jumps into bed, something grabs a hold of him by his hair and wrenches his head upwards. While this is happening, Nellie wakes up and she sees a figure standing in the bedroom. She described it as a man-shaped body with the head of a goat or a sheep. Nellie screams, and the creature kind of lurches forward, but it stumbles. So to brace itself, it reaches out and it grabs onto her leg. She said the hand was clawed, and with that, the beast turned and fled out of the room on all fours, went down the stairs, and left through the front door. Now, Nellie's husband, who was sleeping in the next room, is awoken by all the noise, and he rushes in, but he never saw the creature for himself. At this time, around Hexham, there was a rumor starting to circulate about a drunk man carrying a stolen sheep carcass from an abattoir just across the street from the home the same night, and he was staggering around Reed Avenue. Apparently, he had broken into the slaughterhouse. Some locals suggested that this might explain what Nellie saw, but no one ever confirmed that the man with the carcass was anywhere near the Dodds' house at the time of her encounter. It's also odd that if this was the case, this man staggered into their home, completely drunk on accident, dragged a sheep carcass upstairs and then back downstairs and into the street with Nellie Dodd as the only witness. There's even some people who have gone as far to suggest that the souls of the slaughtered sheep came together psychically to haunt the road in a form of a humanoid sheep creature, which seems totally far-fetched if you ask me. But what both families did agree on was that the events in their homes began only after the Heads were brought inside and shown to the next-door neighbors. The activity in the Robson home continued to escalate. Shards of glass appeared in the sisters' bed. Doors would be found unlocked and open in the morning. Their pet budgie died. And like other families, they buried it in the garden. Apparently, from the spot that the bird was buried, a plant grew. And at night, there would be this ghostly glow in the area. The Robson family at one point became so desperate that they eventually called a local priest in to perform an exorcism. Meanwhile, the Dodds had reached their limit. After Nellie's bedroom encounter, the family applied for an urgent move. The request was granted, and they left the house without returning. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood, and reporters arrived. Television crews followed. The Heads were talked about in very dramatic ways, being dubbed evil heads. They reported that anyone who came near the Heads would feel this overwhelming, otherworldly aura from the Heads. This convinced the Robsons that they needed the objects out of their house. So they handed them over to the authorities. The Heads were examined at Newcastle University and spent some time at Hexham Abbey, and then later made their way to Southampton University for further study. Now, as it so happens, the Hexham Abbey has its own creepy stone. There is a flagstone there that is known as the Devil's Stone. Along the flagstone path that lies between the Abbey and the old Campy Hill graveyard, there is one stone that is avoided by everyone. No one will step on it, and people even spit on it as they pass it. So much so that the stone is now discolored. One theory is that this flagstone was used as a plague stone. So during a great plague, someone would put money under the stone. The person who is selling something would come over, retrieve the money, and leave whatever it is that's being purchased. And somehow this has been connected to paranormal events and the stone being evil. Once the Heads left Hexham and moved through museums and university departments, they eventually reached Dr. Anne Ross. She is a leading specialist in Celtic artifacts. She had first seen photographs of the objects through colleagues and immediately identified the features that she associated with Celtic work. She believed that the Heads were pre-Christian or possibly even linked to the Celtic head cult. She requested that the Heads be sent to her for closer study, and they arrived at her home soon after. She had allowed a geologist named Professor Frank Hodgson to closely examine them under a microscope, and he determined that they had been made with local sandstone and were most likely colored at one point with some sort of pigment. We've mentioned the book that Anne wrote called Pagan Celtic Britain, and she has a whole area dedicated to the cult of the Heads, of which she thought these Hexham Heads might be connected to. She believed that ancient Celtics worshipped the Heads and would chop off the heads of their enemies, as it was both a war trophy but also believed to house magical properties. The heads were the most powerful part of the body and was a major focal point in Celtic religious exercises, as it symbolized the soul and protection. If she's right, and these heads discovered by two young kids were from this era, this would make the heads over 1,800 years old, and it would also mean that they were most likely buried as some sort of magical ward. If they were a guard against evil, then maybe digging them up could have possibly unleashed something wicked. When Dr. Ross received the heads, she immediately noted the coldness that radiated from them and an overwhelming sense of unease. She placed them in her home office among other pieces that she worked with daily. A few days later, she woke in the middle of the night in a total panic, feeling this overwhelming sense of dread and this icy coldness that washed over her whole body. When she looked towards the bedroom door, she saw a tall figure moving through it. She later described it in detail during a BBC nationwide interview. Quote, "I saw this thing going out of the bedroom, and it was about 6 feet high, slightly stooping, and it was black against the white door. It was half animal and half man. The upper part I would have said was a wolf, and the lower part was human. I would have said it was covered in dark fur. It went out, I saw it clearly, and then it disappeared. Something made me run after it, a thing I wouldn't normally have done, but I felt compelled to run after it. I could hear it going down the stairs, and it disappeared towards the back of the house. When I got to the bottom of the stairs, I was terrified." She said that it was covered in black fur, and it walked out of the room. She felt obligated to follow it, so she followed it downstairs, and when she got to the main floor, the creature just disappeared. And again, she was struck with this intense fear. After this, Anne had traveled a few days for work, but when she came home, she found that her daughter Bernice had had her own encounter. She came home to find Bernice pale and upset. According to Bernice, she came home from school, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside. There was a large, dark figure on the staircase. It jumped over the banister and landed in the corridor with the weight of an animal hitting the floor. It ran towards the back of the house. She could hear its footsteps that sounded like animal paws. And then it vanished into the music room before she could reach it. Just like her mother's experience, Bernice too felt like she needed to follow the creature and was overcome with the sense of doom and fear. Now at this time, Anne had no idea about what had happened to Nellie Dodd and her encounter with the sheep-like humanoid creature. But once she learned of this event, she connected both events to the head. So she brings the heads back to the Southampton University, but this didn't completely stop the activity. She wrote her book, Folklore, Myths, and Legends of Britain, that she continued to feel this cold presence in the home, and she would often hear the sound of animal paws walking through the house. Often, her study door would burst open without anyone touching it, and both she and her daughter have seen a dark figure jumping off the banister of their staircase. It was so vivid that they could hear the sound of it landing in the corridor. So how did Anne get the activity to stop? Well, Anne had a large collection of ancient stone heads, and she believed that whatever energy was within the Hexham Heads had attached itself to the heads inside of her home, and once she removed the other heads, all the activity finally stopped. The BBC's nationwide segment covering Dr. Ross's account aired in 1976. The recovered footage shows her describing the figure in her hallway, followed by a cut to Oliver Reed in Curse of the Werewolf. That single shot stayed with viewers for decades. One of them was Tony Pollard, who was 10 years old at the time. He remembered a warning flashing before the segment. His parents ignored it, and the moment the werewolf clip flashed across the screen, he recalled leaving the room, returning too early, and catching a glimpse of the creature howling at the camera. Years later, he said the description of the figure vaulting over the banister still raised hairs on the back of his neck. Now, this isn't the first time that Hexham has been terrorized by a wolf. In December 1904, the Hexham Current ran a headline that sent people in Northumberland straight into alert mode. Wolf at large in Allendale. Farmers had been losing sheep for weeks, and the scale of the attacks pushed families into bringing livestock indoors at night. The animal responsible was described as a large gray wolf, and many believed that it had escaped from Captain Bain's private zoo in County Durham. Search parties formed. Parents kept their children close. The fear spread through the valley faster than the hunt could keep up. On December 9th, the wolf was tracked across the moors after another round of dead sheep was found. It slipped away only to return to the same flock the next day. Meetings were held, rewards were offered. A group calling itself the Hexham Wolf Committee formed to coordinate the effort. The end, however, would come in a way that no one expected. On December 29th, platelayers in Cumwhitton Station found the body of a wolf that had been struck by a Midland Railway Express and thrown a considerable distance. The impact cut the animal in half, so they buried it, then dug it up again after speaking with the station master. A member of the Hexham Wolf Committee identified it as a full-grown male wolf. The head was removed and sent to the Midland Railway quarters in Derby, where it sat in a taxidermist's window for a week before being mounted outside of the boardroom. But arguments continued anyways. Captain Bain said that the dead wolf was too old to be his. Some insisted that the real wolf was still out there. By January 1905, the story faded from the papers and the panic settled. When the Hexham Heads surfaced in 1971 and reports of a wolf-man creature began circulating, locals didn't need anyone to remind them of the old Allendale story. The memory was already there sitting under the surface, and the idea of a wolf returning to the region didn't feel far-fetched to the people who had grown up hearing about the winter of 1904. The Hexham Heads had already collected a trail of hauntings, experts, and television crews when the entire story was hit with a claim that no one expected. A local man and truck driver named Desmond Craigie stepped forward and said that the heads weren't ancient, cursed, or mysterious at all, and that for years he'd been laughing at all the articles about these supposedly cursed heads. According to him, he made them in 1956 while living in the same house that the Robsons would later occupy. He said that he crafted 3 small heads for his daughter to play with because she didn't understand what he did for a living, and so he made them on his lunch break one day. He said that he made them by scooping handfuls of cement and forming balls before carving out the features with a knife. One broke and was thrown out. The other two, he claimed, stayed in the house on a shelf before they were moved out to the garden under a hedge. Craigie worked for a company that handled concrete and made stone blocks, and he said that he used local stone, sand, and water to shape the faces. To prove it, he sat down and he made new replicas using the same material. When it came to the replicas, the general consensus was that they were nowhere close to the same. The replicas came out rougher with less detail than the originals, but he insisted that the method was identical. However, there is one photo of Craigie holding his recreations, and if you ask me, they're pretty damn identical to the originals. But the Robsons questioned why he would make something so horrific for such a young child. Maybe, though, it wasn't intentional. And Anne Ross questioned how he could make something that so closely resembled the other Celtic heads on accident. Not to mention the fact that a geologist had verified that they were made from local sandstone, not concrete. Because of this, the heads were once again sent off for re-examination. This time, actual parts of the head were sliced off. Professor Dearman at the University of Newcastle examined the original heads. His conclusion was that they had been molded, not carved, from compound cement, which supported Craigie's explanation. The announcement, though, didn't settle anything. Some researchers accepted Craigie's claim immediately. Others said that the replicas were too crude to match the originals. The disagreement spread throughout archaeologists, museum staff, and anyone who had handled the heads. The Hexham Heads, which traveled from a garden on Reed Avenue to museums, universities, private homes, eventually vanished. There was a news article in '75 that claimed that the heads were sent back to the Robson family. Why would they want them back after everything is beyond me? But it also says that the mum, Jenny, gave the heads to her cousin. But apparently this cousin's wife started to smell something like incense in the home, which she didn't burn, and so she thought the heads were causing the smell and sent them back to the Robsons, where Jenny said that she buried them back in the garden. However, 2 years later, Don Robson had the heads. He's a parapsychologist and the author of The Secret Language of Stone. According to him, the heads were never brought back to the Robsons and instead spent years sitting in storage at the Southampton University, where he retrieved them from. However, when Desmond had recreated the heads, he made several replicas, and it's possible that some of them were mixed up as they were passed around so much. This also raises questions about which heads were actually tested by Dearman that resulted in the concrete and cement findings. Robson would go on to say that when he first took the heads and put them in his car, all of the electrical systems in his car started acting up. He was so unsettled by them that he kept them in his garden inside of a box. He believed that the Hague was always watching him. At one point, Robson sent the heads to be photographed for a book he was writing, but when the photos came back, none of them were usable. They were all blurred or overexposed. Robson then passed the heads on to a man named Frank Hyde, who was a dowser and psychic, and Frank performed psychic experiments on the heads with pendulums. Shortly after this, Frank was in a horrible car accident, and after that, both Frank and the heads disappeared. Neither of them have been heard from or seen since. However, in more recent years, a 14 Times article about the heads, the author claims that the heads may have ended up in a cave known as Queen's Cave, not too far from Hexham. Seemingly, this information was given to him by a psychic. It's not known whether or not this psychic was Frank. This cave is very hidden and hard to find, but there is supposedly a geocache nearby. And of course, like so much of this story, the cave has its own history. Legend says that in 1464, Queen Margaret of Anjou escaped the Battle of Hexham during the War of the Roses, and she fled with her son to a nearby forest where she crossed paths with a gang. The leader of the gang vowed to keep her safe and took her and her son to a well-hidden cave. However, Queen Margaret was never in the area during the Battle of Hexham. Regardless, the heads have never been found in a forest or a cave. Strangely enough, the priest that had performed the exorcism on the Robsons' home in 1971 was called back to the house. Mark Newton and his adoptive mother Margaret were the new tenants in 2011. They both felt incredibly uneasy about the front bedroom and refused to sleep there. Ever since their visit from the priest, they claimed that the bedroom felt better and whatever presence was there was gone, but they still didn't want to sleep in that room. Could it be possible that they knew the history of the house and it just got under their skin, or was something actually left there by the Hexham Heads? Even more interesting was that Mark had grown up near the slaughterhouse and as a teen would help the drivers make deliveries to the local butchers. He said that the slaughterhouse was rumored to be haunted by, you guessed it, a half-man, half-sheep creature. It was said that even the manager encountered the creature. Seeing a dark figure one night where the carcasses were hanging, he said that it was half man, half sheep, and after that he never went back there without someone else or without a flashlight. It was said that everyone who worked there knew exactly how haunted it was, and that they had a hard time keeping staff because of this. Also, in the changing room, boots and other items of clothing would be moved around the room, switched into different lockers while the men were out on the floor, despite there only being one person with the key to the change room. So, what was actually happening here? Were the heads really haunted or cursed? Once these heads were supposedly revealed as modern items, academics seemed to lose interest in them. However, those involved in more pseudosciences now had their own theories about what the heads were. One theory was that the heads were a recording device of some sort. It's connected to a theory that is widely known as stone tape theory. Don Robson pushed the idea that the Hexham Heads might work like a stone-based memory device. His view was that certain stones could hold traces of past events or emotional energy and then release them later, which he believed could explain the strange activity reported around the heads. This lined up with the much older thinking that eventually became known as the stone tape theory. Stone tape theory claims that intense or traumatic events can imprint themselves onto stone or other material, creating kind of an environmental recording that later plays back under the right conditions. Versions of this idea appeared throughout the 19th century. Charles Babbage suggested that spoken words leave permanent impressions in the air due to the movement of particles. Members of the early Society for Psychical Research, including Edmund Gurney and Eleanor Sedgwick, proposed that certain places or materials could store recordings of past events that might be accessed by particularly sensitive people. Psychometry added another angle with the belief that touching an object could reveal its history. This is a way to explain certain hauntings and other supernatural events that are connected to areas with trauma or emotionally charged events. For example, the Battle of Gettysburg. And apparently, quartz is the best stone for this, and there are those who have said that the heads did have a large amount of quartz. By the 1940s, H. Price reintroduced the idea with a concept that he called psychic ether, which he described as a medium that could hold emotional or experimental traces. He noted that these traces should be detected through scientific methods, though he admitted that no such evidence existed. Later, T.C. Lethbridge expanded on this with the claim that natural landscapes and objects could store past events through surrounding energy fields. His work helped popularize the concept, even though he never actually used the term stone tape himself. With this in mind, could the stones have maybe connected to the sheep that had been slaughtered in the area? Maybe. There's another theory that ties back to Desmond and why he actually made those heads. I mean, if he did in fact make them at all. It's hard to believe that just randomly he made some creepy heads, and they so closely resemble Celtic heads found in the area. They looked so similar that many professionals and historians do believe that they are of Celtic origins. One theory suggests that the area itself might have some sort of power or energy that possesses people to make these heads. As a matter of fact, Colin Robson, one of the boys to first find the heads, had made his own head about 2 months before the discovery for an art competition. He made a head out of clay that was about the same shape and size as the head that he would later find in the garden. In fact, it looked a lot like the head called the Boy. Okay, so how do we explain the heads moving on their own? Now, there was one Manchester museum with an Egyptian statue that would somehow move on its own. In fact, it was even caught on CCTV footage in the store. It's believed that rather than anything supernatural happening, vibrations from outside the store, such as foot traffic or vehicles driving by, were causing the statue to move. The vibrations moved the statue slow enough that nobody noticed, but when playing back the CCTV footage at a high speed, they could see it happening clearly, and it didn't happen at night when the streets were quiet. Could this be what was happening with the heads? Problem with this theory is that they were only turning at night when the house was quiet. But maybe They weren't anything ancient or mystic. Remember, one of the brothers had made a similar head not too long before the other two stone heads were found in the garden. It's entirely possible that maybe he made the heads, or even Desmond, and somehow things spiraled and got carried way out of hand. Either the kids did it themselves, or an adult in the house did as a joke, or a neighbor tossed them into the garden for some reason no one ever figured out. This theory says that the heads were never meant to be mysterious. They were just small concrete sculptures that ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time, like a hoax gone wild that created this crazy chain reaction, planted objects, misinterpreted discovery, media frenzy, with paranormal feeding said media frenzy. And after all of that, no one wanted to come forward and admit the truth, creating a decade-long mystery. However, this doesn't explain how so many different people had similar experiences. Sometimes stories can prime the brain to notice things that may seem unusual but are actually really very mundane, like a draft or a noise. And already having paranormal or creepy events on your mind, the brain fills in gaps to create a supernatural explanation. That could explain what Nellie Dodd saw. If there were rumors about a haunted slaughterhouse and the neighbors are claiming weird stuff is happening to them, Nellie's brain helped create a scenario. It wasn't faking it, but it is sometimes how often human perception works when there is already a story in place. There's also authority effect. Once researchers, journalists, and paranormal investigators got involved, the situation felt official. When someone with credentials says, "Hey, something's going on here," it validates the experience for everyone else. That doesn't create the sensation, but it does shape how people interpret the events. And finally, there's contagion of interpretation. Multiple people can have a completely normal experience, a door moving, a pet reacting to a noise, a cold draft. But because they're all in the same environment with the same expectations, they interpret those events in the same direction. Creepy, weird, paranormal. Regardless of what was going on with the heads, it's interesting how a simple find in a garden can turn into years of theories, arguments, and strange experiences. Sometimes the stories that people build around objects end up being even louder than the objects itself. Thanks for wandering down this crooked path with me. I'm Amanda Joy. Let the curiosity guide you, and let the mystery stay awake a little longer. Follow the path further. If this episode left you lingering in the shadows, there's more to explore. Follow at Down the Crooked Path on TikTok and Instagram for haunting visuals, behind-the-scenes lore, and updates on upcoming episodes. Every post is another breadcrumb deeper into the strange, the forgotten, and the beautifully unsettling. Stay curious and keep walking.